Are you tired of the coffee crash? Still jittery an hour after your morning cup of coffee? Listen, I used to drink 5, 6, 7 cups a day to just keep going. The anxiety, the stomach pains, the afternoon crash, it was brutal. Then I discovered Rise Coffee, and everything changed. Rise has less than half the caffeine as regular coffee, but here's the magic. It contains 6 organic mushrooms, including cordyceps, lion's mane, and others that naturally sustain your energy without the jitters or crash. We're talking sharper focus, immune support, better gut health, and calm, sustained energy that lasts all day. Plus, it's organic, vegan, and has 0 added sugars. Unlike other mushroom coffees, Rise is USA grown in California. A full spectrum of mushrooms per serving that actually works. Here at Pod Nation, we only partner with brands we actually believe in, and Rise Coffee is the real deal. Head to risesuperfoods.com and use promo code PODNA15 for 15% off your order. That's PODNA 15 for 15% off. Ditch the crash. Fuel your day the right way with Rise Coffee. This podcast is a proud member of Pod Nation Media Network.
Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I'm speaking with Matthew Woodcock about the, I don't know whether this is going to offend or not, a science fiction spy sort of thriller?
Yeah.
Would you say?
It's really difficult to I mean, I suppose it is I don't know how spoilery we want to get into it, but I feel like we can't really avoid spoilers if we're going to talk about this in any great depth, because there is certainly a kind of science fiction-y twist within the middle of it, which so I suppose spy-fi is as good a term as any, I think, to describe this.
Okay, and an easy way of saying this without spoiling too much, then, I think, is, so The Divide, the main character of it, he believes that at different points he's in the 1960s, and at another point he's in the 2020s, closer to our time and post-COVID. So, but what happens during it, you decide, or you find out what is the reality of that situation.
Yeah, I think there's a degree to which I liked the idea of it being up to audience interpretation to an extent. I like the idea that when we've just done a couple of listen-alongs actually on our Discord, and it was interesting that there was a split between people 50-50 as to what the reality of the situation is for him, and that was very much what I was kind of interested in playing around with, is that perception of reality, and the divide between what is real and what is not is kind of really at the heart of the story. So it's quite pleasing that you can actually go, did this occur or didn't this occur, and you as a listener are able to kind of come to your own decision and use your brain. And I'm not going to reveal more than that in terms of whether it did happen, because I think that's really, it's nice for you as a listener to be able to come to your own conclusions, I think.
Well, it's a bit like, in a way, sort of a bit like Billion Dollar Brain in that way, in a sense, with the Jean Le Carré, with where the Michael Caine character in the film. There's certain bits that happen in there where, because of what's going on with that character, Harry Palmer, you cannot be 100% certain as to what is real and what is based around the what they're doing to him mentally, with things that they're feeding to him. So there's that similarity there, and that sort of, is it real, is it not real, and leaving it up to the audience.
Yeah, I think it's it's one of those things where the truth of it is less important. It's the way it affects the character, and your perception of the character, I think, is as an audience as well, is what's to me most interesting. And I think that's the same in those Harry Palmer films. And funny enough, I was rewatching the Ipcris File the other week, which is the first one, and that's very much a kind of world of distrust and paranoia and brainwashing and things like that. So there is a lot of that kind of 60s obsession with um paranoia and brainwashing things did really feed into it as a drama, and it was just kind of like finding a parallel into the modern world as well. So that was certainly something that was maybe subconsciously in the back of my mind when I was writing it.
Well, the main character, if I remember rightly, his name's Paul. The main
Paul Wilder,
character,
yeah.
Paul Wilder. Yep.
Yeah.
The main character, the way that he is portrayed, and he sort of lends himself to that sort of time period in the way that he conducts himself.
Yeah, he's very much a man of the early 60s, and because the vast majority of the Divide is set in and around 1964, and we're in my head we're kind of February March time, so it's quite early in 1964. And I think with the 60s you've got that kind of almost the idea that the 60s that we think of in pop culture doesn't really start until later in that year, 64, 65 time. So it was taking in some like early 60s, late 50s kind of sensibilities. And it was nice to have that and to give him that kind of that kind of feel about him, that way that he speaks, the way that he thinks about things. He's in a very privileged position because obviously we're 20 odd years from the end of the war. He thinks that we've kind of solved those problems. He's a man, he's a white man in 1964, and that gives him automatically a degree of privilege that, say, his partner June Dalton does not have, or has to fight to get, because she's a woman. And so to then take him and then push him into a different time, you can then play those sensibilities off against our own sensibilities and our own cultural, where we are in terms of our culture now in 2026. Gosh, it's 2026, isn't it now? It's frightening how quickly we time travel into a new year anyway.
Yeah, and it's more difficult for Paul initially because he's suddenly thrown into a world with smart devices and phones ringing in his like, what's that? And it is that person out of time in a sense.
Yeah, I think when I was writing it was very much having to think, what would it be like if you were suddenly taken from a world that you understood and a world that you had grown up in, and suddenly be plonked down in a world that very much looks like the world you knew. The buildings are the same, they're cleaner, but also the things are different. It's like it's off kilter. It's like a Dutch angle, because suddenly you're dealing with computers, and you're dealing with smartphones, and you're dealing with electric trains and HR and things that really you wouldn't be familiar with, or I don't think he'd be familiar with in the same way in his own time. And how he copes with that, how he thinks about that, it very much destabilizes him, and he's already at the point where we meet him reasonably destabilized by the trauma of his own past. Because I think the key to Paul, or the heart of Paul Wilder, is as much about a man who is trying to come to terms with himself and the things that have happened to him in his recent past that have led him to retreat. When we meet him at the start of the series, he's living alone in the middle of nowhere, and that is how he seems or how he projects to us that he likes it. But I think it's interesting to see how true that is, how much of that he's telling himself to make himself feel better, or to hide the fact that maybe actually it's not quite the case.
I do actually love the fact that when you find him, he lives in an old, what used to be, is a former railway carriage, and that thought to me just brought to mind the guy. I don't know whether you'll know this one or not, but the railway driver that drives the train in the Titfield Thunderbolt, he also lives in a railway carriage.
Yeah, funny enough, it didn't. It was one of the things that didn't prop into my mind at the time. It was actually, where I live in Oxfordshire, we're not too far away from the Didcot Railway Centre, which is this um, GWR. Basically, it's like a working museum, and you've got steam trains that run around and stuff. And they had a display of photographs in there of a railway carriage that had actually been turned into a house. And I just thought, this feels too good not to use. So I squirreled it away into the back of my head, and then it just sort of popped out when I was coming to actually construct the story. Was it just felt like the perfect place for him, somewhere that's small and lonely and enclosed, which is kind of how he feels at the start, I think.
So when when you came up with the idea for the story, then what was the inspiration for making it into an audio drama as opposed to some other format?
It's a medium I've worked in now on and off for, God, where are we? A good 12 years, I think, on and off in different forms. So when I started constructing it, it was kind of the first. It was automatic. I didn't really think about it in terms of, would this make a book, or is this a telly or something like this. It just felt like the most natural thing in the world to me was to just head for audio. I understand it now as a thing. I feel comfortable working in it. So it was my automatic go-to choice as to where I would plant this, really. And it gave me the opportunity to play with some devices that I hadn't really played around with before. Because I think when I first started writing it, I thought it would be nice to make it almost a first-person narrated story, and see how that would affect the pace of it and the writing and things like that. And I'm really glad it did, because it challenged me to work with things that I hadn't necessarily done before. And I think in the end, it's almost, how can I say this? It's almost like it fits the medium, because it's so internalized. It's about his struggle and what state his mind is at various different points, and you're inside his head and you're with him all the time. So really, audio is such a good medium for being able to explore a character in kind of so much depth like that, particularly if you've got 12 episodes to play with and nobody telling you can't.
Well, in that way, it's almost a bit like a Philip Marlowe novel, where you are being told the story by the main character, with external voices coming in as they need to in the story itself, which is why you get June and you get the other characters as well. When their bits come in, they have their dialogue, but the story, like you said, is being narrated by this first person that we are that person, in a way, that is telling the story. We're hearing it from his point of view. So, yeah, you were going to say?
Yeah, no, I know. I was going to say, yeah, it's something that you see a lot in kind of like spy fiction and thriller fiction, and it's there for a reason. It's good stuff. It's it's a great way of hooking you into the story, and because if you're with that character and you're in that mental space, you can almost project yourself into them as well. And I think that's, it's good for really digging yourself in. I found it quite entertaining as a way, because I'd not really written like that before.
Also going into this, going further into it with the literature of spy novels and spy writing, a lot of them are written by people who are former spies anyway, sort of Ian Fleming, Roald Dahl, and and John le Carré, Dayton, all these people had been in that industry anyway and worked there. So it's like them using poetic license and putting themselves, it's an exaggeration of their own characters in a way, which is why they tell it that way and tell it in the first person.
Yeah. I am obviously not a spy and have never been a spy, so I did have to use a fair amount of license. But it was, it is almost, I think, one of the ways I described it to, or spying, or that whole kind of thing of intelligence work, I said to Max when we'd starting out, was I felt it should be a bit like sexy admin. And there's a lot of people behind desks, but the things that they do behind desks are have a global importance. So I liked that idea of, you're right, it's kind of that idea of projecting yourself into a world that maybe you could never be a part of, but you secretly wish you could. And I think that is very attractive about it, is office work that is not just moving paper clips around.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I love about the Fleming written Bonds, actually, is that you are in the first person in Fleming's novels, and the same goes for the Jean le Carré. You're in the first person most of the time in those as well. But so you got this idea then there, but then you've twisted the spy genre in a way by giving it that sort of out of timeness, or two different time periods, and is it time travel, is it not time travel, and that gives it that little bit extra of a twist.
Yeah, that was, it's hard to know where that came from. I think it was, I was looking through the notes I'd made when the idea percolated up, and it's there in the original kind of plan. And I just liked the idea of taking him and dropping him somewhere else. And there's the specific cliffhanger in the story when you get to the end of episode 4, which starts that second chapter of the tale, where we are projected forwards, is in there. And it was just something that I got fixated on for a while. And I almost got, I was thinking about this the other day. I almost didn't go with it. I did have, for about a couple of days, a thought of going, shall I take it out? Shall I make it straighter? And then I went, I know I got the license to do it. Nobody's saying don't. If we're going to do it, let's see where it takes us and how it changes the story. And then it becomes really, again, for me, not really about science fiction or a science fiction idea. It's about human reactions and how you react to the world around you. But it was, it was an exciting twist to the story, because I think for me as well, I've written a lot of kind of fantasy, horror, sci-fi kind of stuff on in podcast form before. I did want to try something that wasn't that, but I think there's always that little bit in the back of your mind which goes, get back to that, do that, and I couldn't really resist, because it was too delicious an idea, and it was scratching an itch in the back of my mind that I kind of had to follow it and see where it went.
I can understand that, because I'm trying not to give away anything at all. Really, it's not the easiest thing to do.
No, it isn't. Maybe if you're listening to this and you've not heard it, maybe you should pause this and go and listen to it all and then come back. But I mean, you maybe sleep as well during the time you're doing that.
I think it's one of the best thriller-based audio dramas that I've heard in years. I will say that. I think it's incredible. There's one bit in particular that, even that MacGuffin that you've got there, that that lends itself to characterization then as well, because when Paul is in a specific situation where something, a fatal thing happens to somebody, he doesn't say to that he's supposed to be protecting, but that happens. But he's already away and left in that situation where he's almost sort of like come back to the 60s. So this thing's happened, and then in his own, you can feel and hear in the dialogue and the way that Paul is meant talking to you in the narrative, you can hear and feel that emotion within him where he's fighting with himself and he's like, what happened? I don't know what happened. And you can hear the machinations going on, and that is all character led moments that just come from that. So the MacGuffin that you've given it builds up the character of Paul.
Yeah, it's a real. I mean, we did put Mark through the ringer a hell of a lot on that, and he did an incredible job. And but it is absolutely finding ways of exploring his character, exploring how he sees the world, how he reacts to things, and putting him in situations that are quite extreme. Well, quite extreme is an understatement, I think, if we're talking about this. But it's it is that thing. If you've got a character, you want to see how he reacts to things and what that makes him do and how it makes him feel, because that's really the important thing. I think it has to be hand in hand. The action of the story has to go hand in hand with the character, and you don't want either of those things to unbalance, particularly in something like this, which is a cliffhanger based serialized thriller. You want those two parts of that equation to go together and sort of not destabilize it. So, but without one and without the other, it's nothing. It's not as exciting. Really, to make it good, anything like this, you really have to have a character who you can, if not sympathize with, you can certainly enjoy seeing put through the ringer, or be fascinated by what happens to him next. So I think it was really interesting, certainly for me as well, writing it, to see how he would react and see what would happen to him at that time. Because sometimes, the general plan, but then sometimes you'll be led by the character and how he's going to react, and what that and sometimes that'll push the story into a direction you might not have been expecting.
I was about to say something else, but I'll leave that until we get to after we've finished recording, because there is one bit that I really love, but that is a really big spoiler. So I'm just going to write a note down while we're talking.
Yeah.
Come on, give me a pen that works. Yep, there you go. That was interesting for people that are listening, probably. So how did you go about developing the story and creating the characters? And were you always looking for little beats, or did you have those already in place and you built the story around those little hooky beats where you left the story with the cliffhangers?
That's an interesting question, because I've been interrogating this a lot, and I remember when I did a show called Down for Definitely Human back in 2020, and we were prepping that, and I was part of a writing team for that, because Max and David Knight were also writing that, and they were very much kind of block everything out, know everything that's going to happen all the time. Whereas I think I came to it as kind of like, yeah, no, we'll see how this goes. We know what we need, but I'll see where this goes. So I've always been a bit more instinctual in how I write, and certainly in other things, you can wing it based on how well you know the character. With this, it was a bit of a mixture. The idea came to me kind of, at least for the first 4 episodes, came to me really organically. I was walking along the beach that's actually the beach in episode 1 of the series, because we were up in Scotland at the time, and I don't know, my wife was off with the kids, so I was on my own, and suddenly it was like a switch had been flicked in my head, and suddenly I had kind of the first 4 episodes, or an idea of what the first 4 episodes would feel like pretty much immediately. I knew it would open on a beach. I knew that you would follow this character, and he had, this experience that happens to him at the end of episode 4. So up until that point, the story elements of it were pretty much fixed. And then I went away and I storylined it a bit more strongly, and I thought about the world that he inhabited, particularly the organization that he belongs to. Less so his internal character beats. They were more instinctual. I think they came out of the process of writing it and redrafting and beginning to find his voice. And then once we got to the episode 4 cliffhanger, that point where everything spins on its axis, I pulled away from it for a bit just to think about what I wanted to tell, what story I was looking to tell. So because you're moving into the future and you've got this science fiction element to it, what are you doing with it? What's it supposed to say? And I was becoming quite interested. I did a lot of research into kind of what was going on politically and what was going on in terms of technology, and that felt like an interesting parallel, because I think the question I've always asked myself at all points as I've written it is, what is the divide in terms of not what between on nebulous terms of good and evil, of what's true and what's not true, what you can trust and what you can't. So it's making sure that all of those bits are fit that idea of there being a divide. And I thought it would be nice not just to see how Paul reacts to the world of 2025, but also to see, what similarities and what differences, what's cyclical and what isn't, and draw parallels between the two things. Because I think, you've got those kind of cliches from 60s spy fiction that we've talked about, like brainwashing and things like that, and the idea of manipulating people chemically. And I thought the obvious, it's not rocket science, but the obvious parallel is the way we use social media, the way that the media can talk to us, the way that we are drawn into smaller and smaller kind of groups and pushed further to the extremes, and how companies and people can manipulate you in different ways, and not chemically, but just through the things that you look at on your phone and the things that you're exposed to online. And I thought that was quite interesting. We're going into a really fascinating but also really terrifying time, I think, politically, and we're in a time of upheaval technologically and all of that, and how people react to that and how you can use that as a tool of disruption and control, I thought were really, really interesting things. So once I kind of built that into it, it was kind of going back into the story and seeing how that would work. And I storylined the rest of the show pretty organically from there. And knowing also it was a serial, and I really kind of like cliffhangers and things. I grew up on old school Doctor Who, where you'd always have a cliffhanger every 25 minutes. So I kind of like the idea of building up and hitting that beat at the end, which leaves you hanging. I like that idea of, I'm not a binger with media. I know I quite like delayed gratification. I like that idea of you get to that point and you go, oh my God, what's going to happen next? And then you have to sit on it for an entire week. I find that really, really enjoyable, because that frisson of like having to have this in the back of your mind playing around until the next week's episode. So I was really keen on doing that and finding a point where a good, strong, exciting cliffhanger. Sometimes it would be something really, really dramatic. Sometimes it would just be something that left you intrigued to keep going. But I always knew that we'd build to a cliffhanger, and that would be how it progressed. So and again, it was kind of, sometimes it was more organic than others. Sometimes it was just me going, no, this feels the right moment to do this. And sometimes it was like, no, for example, with episode 4, and I think with episode 8, I knew that those were very specific things I wanted it to do, and very specific things that I was writing towards, rather than just sort of being a bit laid back and winging it and hoping for the best.
I too am one of those people that I like to watch episodic television, for instance. I prefer that to watching it all in one big lump. I like the old format of, we used to watch things on the television where you get for instance, you'd have like a 2 or 3 part, showing my age here, 2 or 3 part episode of The Professionals, for instance. So you get a cliffhanger at the end of the first part, and then there was that conversation. Then, as school kids, you'd be in the school and in the playground, and you'd be chatting with your friends, and you'd have this thing in common with each other, and you'd be like, "Oh, so how do you think this is going to turn out?" And there's that conversation there that builds it up, and that's something that I've always liked. Where nowadays, I think if it's a binge sort of thing with these sort of shows, there's that possibility where if you just listen to them all, or you watch all these things in one go, and you have them all just fed to you in one go, in one stream, so to speak, you lose the sort of like how it builds and builds and builds for the audience in a way. But so I'm going to say something now, which is, so this is twofold where I'm going to go now. So I was speaking with Sam Sethi, who designed a podcasting streaming platform called True Fans, and he's putting something in place where people who listen, they can actually listen at the same time as each other, and they have live chats between each other, these groups, about what will be going on in these episodes that they listen to. And I like that sort of like allowing that allows the listeners then to immerse themselves a lot more. And Lauren Shippen, who were from Atypical Artist, she does this thing as well. Recently, where she had a series, and she did this thing where every week after the episodes come out, she would actually have people who are listeners in a chat, and they would all chat between themselves, and they'd have this back and forth, and she'd be sort of like just listening in, or occasionally joining the conversations in a way, which I just find that is a lot better than the binge mentality in a way.
Yeah, I mean, if binging is what you want to do, then that's fine. It's not. I mean, also I've got young kids, and I could never binge anything ever because I'm just too tired. But that thing that they used to have with when you just was literally just linear television, and you just had a program on once a week. That thing of that old thing of the water cooler moment where everybody would talk about something the next day because they'd seen it on the telly. That thing of this collective cultural moments, I think, is something that we kind of lost a bit when we moved over to SVODs and streaming platforms like that, because suddenly you were in a world where, say, the Netflix model, where you were releasing 13 episodes all in one go, and they weren't at a specific time, like a Thursday at 9 or something like that. So everybody's just watching at their own pace. And you can still see there are people moving around and trying to work out what model works in you can't really call it New World now because we've been in it since at least 2013. But that thing of a collective experience is really nice. That's why we listen to audio dramas, or we watch TV dramas and things like that, is because we want to be told a story and we want to share that experience, I think, with other people. And certainly when we've with the divide and in our shows at Definitely Human has been that we also have the Discord server, and we have regular listeners who will pop on there. They'll have listened to the episode and then they talk to each other about it on there. And obviously we've done listen alongs for our shows as well, where everybody is together at the same time, and it's very crude. It's literally just saying it's 8:05, press play now, and hope to God everybody presses play at the same time. But it is that thing of having a shared experience, which you don't get with a lot of scripted scripted programs anymore. You get it a bit with sports and entertainment shows, because they are things that people want to watch on transmission, or they're things that people want to watch within 24 hours of transmission. Whereas I think, with drama now, I'm watching things like Riot Women that went out in September last year, and I just not got around to watching. So, and it's great, and I can enthuse about them with people, but it's not the same as being able to turn around to somebody the next day and say, "Did you see that thing last night?" or "Did you listen to that thing?" So I do like that build up to the next episode, and I do like that thing of making people wait. And it appeals to me just because also I'm an old man, and it just makes sense. It makes sense to me in my head that you would wait.
Well, if you're going to say that, then I am also an old man in that way. So you've developed the story, you've created the characters. How do you then decide who's going to who to get to perform as those characters, and then where do you go then with the direction of these actors?
We've been very lucky over, I've been very lucky over my entire sort of, it's not really, it would be a lie to call it a career. I think it'd be, I suppose the closest would be messing around. I've had like almost like a repertory company of people that we always work with, that we know are good, and we've met through the way. I had specific people in mind for specific roles. I knew, for example, with June Dalton, I really kind of in my heart of hearts was hoping that EJ Martin would come back out of retirement, especially for me, and she absolutely did, which I was really pleased about. And but for example, with Paul, I had no idea who we were going to get to play Paul Wilder.
Okay.
I knew it wasn't going to be me, because it wasn't a part that suited my range. And also I didn't want to be writing it and co-producing and directing and starring in it. That would be a vanity too far, and I would just have to die under a desk somewhere every time they read out my name. And it's bad enough at the moment. But so we were looking around, and we'd spoken with casting director. He knew, and she'd given us some suggestions. And then he'd remembered Mark from recording Mars Corp, which is another of Definitely Humans podcasts. And he'd done some work for them on the long gestating series 2. And he said to me, "What about Mark? Listen to his voice reel. What do you think?" And he played me the voice reel, and I went, "Well, this is it. This is what we have to have. Please kidnap this man and put him in a box somewhere for me." And so we approached him. I think Max did the initial approach because he had the relationship in place. So he sent in the 4 scripts for the first 4, which we did for pretty much everybody that we wanted, or everybody got involved with it. We sent them the first 4, and he said yes pretty much within 24 hours. I think we expected him to read the first one. He apparently ended up reading all 4, which I thought was a good sign. So we cast it. That felt really a nice piece of casting, because he's just so brilliant. He's so, as a man, as when you meet him, he's so not Paul Wilder. He's so much nicer than Paul would ever be, but he can just turn it on. He's so professional. He's such a good actor, and he knows. It's just almost like I didn't really have to do that much work with him because he had read those scripts. He internalized what was going on. He knew what he wanted, knew what I wanted, and it felt so just easy with him. He was so brilliant, and the chemistry that Mark and EJ had together was electric. There are some scenes which even now, there is a scene at the end of episode 9 which I've always said is my favorite scene in the whole thing, is just them, I was going to say chatting to each other, but it's more screaming than just in a room, and it's so tense, and it was fabulous. They were so good, and I was really pleased with them and what they did together, and everybody who got involved. Really, we found a few people I was going to say conned, but that's not true. A few people I dragged out of my phone from my old London Dungeon days, because 25 years ago nearly, I worked for the London Dungeon as an actor.
Okay.
And I met so many really, really good, talented people there. So people like Simon Kane, who has done work with John Finnemore and writes for Mitchell and Webb, and Ben Whitehead, who is one of, I think, our best performer. He's such a good actor. He's incredible voice work, and obviously now has seen incredible success with Wallace and Gromit, which is a culmination of a partnership with him and Aardman going back years now, but is so. I've used him in other things before. I just was able to text him and say, "Do you fancy doing this in a shed for 5 minutes?" And he's always just said yes, and he always gives a performance that is so exciting and different, and I was really glad that he came on board for this. And Simon, again, is somebody I've known for 25 years. I kind of wrote knowing that Simon could do this kind of work, and he is another actor who, when you get him in the studio, you're never quite sure of what's going to come out, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean that in a really exciting sense. He's such a exciting performer, because he will always give you something that you don't expect. And there were times when Max and I were sat when we were recording, listening to him go, and just killing ourselves with laughter, because there's got such a kind of dry humor underneath that. He can bring out the comedy from it, but he also knows that he's playing a dangerous man, and this is something that he can just straddle those two worlds and do it in such an exciting way. But it wasn't just people that I dragged out of my phone. It was also, we were lucky that we worked with another actor and producer called Amelie Edwards, who has done a lot of work with Definitely Human, and she has connections with other actors and got us a lot of people who came in and did some of the smaller roles, and put us in touch with Rachel Hines, who plays one of the 2025 characters, who's kind of quite pivotal to the whole of the story, called Rebecca. And she was in Harry Potter on the West End, and she'd done a little bits here and there, and she came in, and that was for a day to record all her material, and that was really exciting, because suddenly I was working with people I'd never met before, and that's where you kind of start going, oh God, you people have to trust me now that I know what I'm doing, and can you see that I'm an idiot? And I think I managed to get away with it. Nobody left looking particularly irritable, so I took that as a win. And it's just getting them in and making people feel comfortable. And it was, the directing approach to it was for me, when I've worked stuff, because I've worked a lot in like fringe theatre and things like that, my preference is always to try and get people together, because acting is about, I don't want to say acting is reacting, but I just have. It's that thing of bouncing off people. It's that thing of, you can give a really good performance on your own, and I've seen people do it. It's certainly the way that when I've recorded stuff for like Mars Corp, when I've done work for them, it's always been, someone feeds me the lines and I give the performance. But you're kind of trusting the director and the company to be able to stitch that together and make it sound like two people having conversation and not two sides of a conversation just stitched together. And by and large, I think it works. But what I really, really wanted to try and do, if possible, was to try and get people together, at least in pairs or in quartets, so that we could really bounce off each other. And we were really lucky that we were able to somehow record at Orpheus Studios in Dalston, which was this amazing little recording studio underneath a cultural centre. I can't remember what cultural centre it was, but it was a lot of Eastern European text, and it's kind of and samovars, and it kind of suited the mood. I thought it was kind of serendipitous, and just work with people in those spaces and see them bouncing off each other. And I think it brought it to life, and it brought an energy to it that I think if we had have been recording remotely and separately all the time, we might not have had. And especially with a project like this as well, where you are working with a premise that is a little bit out there, and you are taking that leap into another time, and there is action, and there is things like that, things that happen to the characters physically, and there are things that you have to kind of you kind of have to have a physicality about it. So being there and being able to talk people through it is essential. I think it's really important. I remember recording the middle of episode 8 in Oxford, in a studio in Oxford that we'd hired with Mark and EJ, and I was listening to the raw takes of it the other day, and the first take, it's fine, it's really good, and then I said to them, whilst we're recording, shall I talk you through what's happening? And because I did that, and because we suddenly, as I was doing it, I was getting into it and they were getting into it, it gave it a real boost, and the life of it came out. And I think that's really, it's something that if you're lucky enough to do it, if you're lucky enough to have that opportunity to do, then absolutely go for it and record like that. Obviously, it's not always the case. It's not, there are enough things I've done remotely because that's the only way you can make it work. And as long as you've got a director there who can help you through it and who knows what's going on and can keep you on course for what they want and for what you want, then it's equally successful. But it was really, really exciting and exhilarating for everybody to be together in these spaces and build a little company up together and really dig into the material, which I was really pleased with, because obviously I'd written it as well, and that's quite frightening to suddenly go from it living in your head to putting out there. So at least if you can see what their faces are doing as they say the words, they don't hate it that much.
Well, I know that when I've done it myself, that I always find it better when I'm in the company of other people and I'm reacting to other people when I'm playing a role myself, because you get that sometimes when you're acting against somebody or with other people, they'll put their own sort of like affectation in there. And I mean, the dialogue's still the same and it's still the same in a way, but there's those affectations that you then notice yourself and then you react to those. Whereas if you were doing it remotely, which I've also done as well, and it's sort of uncomfortable, you can do it, but there's a sort of discomfort to doing it remotely. And there's a naturalness to responding to people when you're there with them.
Yeah, completely. I think it's when I have done things remotely, and I have done things where I've been sent the script and kind of left to it, and you're kind of having to second guess your performance. You're trying to guess what your director or your producer is looking for out of that, and you can give a good performance, but you listen back and you think, well, maybe I would have been better if somebody was there and they were feeding me something to work off, and I was, because you're having to kind of put yourself in the other character that you're playing off's shoes as well, so that you can give yourself something in your head to be shouting against or to be reacting to. So it is nice when you have got at least somebody there, either virtually or or in person. I mean, we've recorded when I was doing a show called The Monster Hunters about 12 years ago. That was a situation where we would literally just record in someone's front room, and you'd stop every now and again because somebody was going over the ceiling in high heels or something. But which was always but unfortunately, you're not allowed to tell people to take their shoes off if they don't live in your house. Who would know? But it's still that thing of having a space to be in and do it. And I think one of the great things now is a lot of the mics and things that you're working with are decent quality mics, and the sound quality that you get off them is not as horrible as, say, it was 15 years ago. And he says, I'm not a technologist. I could be talking out if there's somebody there who says, I don't know what he's saying, but it sounds rubbish, then it probably is. But because I did a talking book recently, and I did some I recorded most of it in a studio, but I did some pickups from this room, and when we'd only recently moved in, so it was a little less soundproof than it is now, which we hadn't put any books in, and I was worried that it would be too echoey. And when I heard it back, actually, they had managed to make it not sound awful. So that was quite interesting. So it is possible to just use any space and get some people in to an extent, as long as you've soundproofed it a bit and it's not awful. And that's quite a way around it. It doesn't have to be a studio, but we were really lucky to find two affordable studios in London and Oxford that we could spend a few days in and really work at it.
Yeah. So you've recorded, mixed it, you've cast it, you've directed it, but also in the recording and mixing, you've got some really good sound effects in there, and some. Is there some Foley work going in there, or is that all sounds that you've got from another source?
It's a mix of both. We're really lucky to work with a guy called Tom Dowling, who is, genius feels like a overused word, but he's very, very good. He really cares, and he really, really puts so much effort into what he does. And I said to him when we first set out on this, and I was speaking to him about it, it's like, the scripts themselves have a lot of talk about radiophonic sound and blending the sounds in and out. And I'd said to him, I want the soundscape to be almost like a character in the drama itself.
Yeah.
And it's because I think that's, you want it to be immersive, you want it to feel it. And I think one of my notes to him was always, it needs to hurt more. I wanted you as an audience listening in your headphones to maybe want to take them out a bit, because it's a way of exploring Paul's character. You're in his head, and the sound design is his head effectively in a lot of respects. So a lot of the weird noise that Tom found, he had a library of effects that he's used on other projects, some which he'd found online that he'd licensed or found like free material, and others that he'd created himself for other projects. I think there is a car crash in episode 8 where there is noises in there that I think he'd made with a tin can years ago for something else that got fed back into it and used. And so he was very careful about the way the air would sound and how that moved across things. I mean, we had a chat for we've been doing a sort of like a behind the scenes series on the Definitely Human Patreon, and we spent a good 40 odd minutes, 30 minutes talking about how he did the sound design, because I thought it's a really, it's so amazing to hear those episodes once they've had the first dialogue edit done and they're just on their own, and hearing the difference between just hearing them in the studio or hearing them cut together and hearing what Tom is able to do and create this sonic world around those characters that's really, you really feel drawn into. And that's what I really wanted. And he got it very quickly. He got the idea that I would always tell him, push harder, make it nastier. And I think by the time we got to episode 12, I was barely sending him notes because he was just getting it first time. And the way he blends sound and the way he blends it into the music and out again, and finds these sound effects that work. And also it was, in terms of sound effects and things like that as well, it was about me saying we need to make sure the world of 1964 is different to the world of 2025. So a train has to sound different to a train sounds now, and a phone has to sound like the right kind of phone, and things like that. You have to understand there is a difference. You're conjuring it through the soundscape that you're putting on it as much as you are in the script and the performances. It's about feeding people those kind of cues through the sound. So he was really good. And sometimes I'd say to him, this train has to sound like that. It can't sound like that. But he'd find me something, and it would just work. And we were really lucky with Tom. He does excellent jobs, and I think he really enjoyed doing it as well, because he'd not done much for a few years, and it was really a great way for him to get back in and get his teeth into something again after a few years off. So yeah, we're really lucky with Tom. That's why I've locked him in his house and he can't leave.
Okay, so let's check out your spy credentials, shall we, by asking you, what are your favourite spy novels, films, TV shows, or any sort of media that you like?
I've inhaled a lot over the years. I came to it mainly probably from television first, more than anything else, because I was lucky enough to grow up at a time when all the 60s kids were hitting middle age and weeping a lot, and revisiting their youth. And I remember around 1992, you suddenly had like The Man from U.N.C.L.E. was on television on BBC Two, and that just felt, I don't know why, it just captivated me, captured me, and it's lived in my head ever since. The pens and nonsense like that, and because the pen communicators and the international glamour of it all, even though it's filmed in Southern California, and similarly with Lou Grade's ITC shows, the things like The Champions and Danger Man and things like that, and The Prisoner obviously are shows that grabbed me as a teenager and haven't really let go ever since, which is frustrating. But I think because they create a world in and of themselves, I think what I always find fascinating with those is the sausage factoriness of them all, that they're similar, but they're the same but different, aren't they? And you have, and nobody is afraid to just say we're in the south of France now, and you can convince people you're in the south of France because you've put like a palm tree and somebody's wearing sunglasses and you're drinking Campari.
Yeah.
And that's all you needed. I love that kind of, we're just going to go for it and hope for the best, and it will look good, and somehow it works, creating that kind of world. And then as I've got older, I was in the right point when Bond returned with Pierce Brosnan. So I remember Goldeneye, and that kicked me off in that direction and things like that. And then later on in my 20s, Radio 4 did an amazing cycle of Smiley adaptations starring Simon Russell Beale, which I think were the thing that really kicked me into really getting hooked on it and picking up Le Carré, because I'd never read Le Carré before that. And I heard Simon Russell Beale, who I still think is probably the best Smiley. I mean, I think there's some really good other George Smileys, but he was my first. So I think I've always got Simon Russell Beale in my head when I read one, and that pushed me into books. I've read a lot of Len Deighton recently, which I think is always felt in my 20s like that was something you saw in charity shops with a submarine on the front, but feels like it's been given a much needed sense of legitimacy now. I think, they're in Penguin Classics, and I read the Bernard Sampson novels in the last 5 years, which I think are possibly some of my favorite books I've read. I think the way, because I think the Ipcris File is a great novel. It's probably a better film, but it's a great novel. And I like the fact that in the Ipcris File and that series of novels, he has the audacity to create a character who's not named throughout any of the books. You just see it from his point of view, but you don't know his name, and you're never told his name. And I think that is kind of, I like the fact that he felt he could get away with that. But what I like about the Bernard Sampson books is that it's a man in his 40s writing about being in his 40s and writing about being a spy who doesn't feel at home in the UK because he was brought up in Berlin, but he doesn't necessarily feel totally at home in Berlin because everybody treats him like he's British. And he's married into a class above him. He doesn't get on with his father-in-law, and then this monumental thing happens halfway through the first one, which absolutely turns his world upside down, and you see that through his eyes. And you're seeing a man writing it who is of that time in his life, clearly, and has that experience. And it feels so, it's one of those things where the character is and the story go together, and they're just as intrinsic to each other as you couldn't have one without the other. And I think with, say, some of his earlier novels, you could possibly say the action is more important to them, but there's still that degree of cynicism. And another series which I really love, sorry if I'm waffling on.
That's okay.
But Yorkshire Television's 1978 series, The Sandbaggers, is an absolute, I would rate it as possibly the best TV series about spies ever made. I think it's, if you've got a tolerance for multi-camera videotape television, I would heartily recommend checking it out if you've never seen it, because I like the fact that the minimal budget is part of its identity, because it's not about the spies that go out shooting people and climbing the wall, and that's a part of it, but really what we're interested in is what's happening in the office, and the power dynamics between the lead characters and the relationships they have, and the lack of personal lives that they have, and the messed upness of them all. When I was talking to Max about it, when I was saying you have to watch this, I think I described to him as men in corridors shouting at each other in acronyms, which I think there is a degree of that, but it's done in a way that is just so hugely compelling that I find it very easy to return to as a show.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those were kind of my touch points to go to. But I've read, I've been reading some interesting thing. I found a Donald James novel from in a Tesco on the Shetland Isles last year, which I read recently. It was in one of those like charity bins, and that was quite fascinating because this was obviously, it's a novel that people have forgotten about, and I find forgotten media quite interesting. I find like people like Dennis Wheatley who were really big and had that audacity to mix genres up a bit, who were massive, and now people have kind of forgotten. I find that quite fascinating, and certainly that ability to go from one book being like with the Duc de Richelieu books, where you go from one of them is about like the Nazis, and then the next book is him punching the devil in the face, and you can do that within the same character and nobody bats an eyelid. So I thought, that was kind of like an unconscious steer into going, yeah, no, I can move from the past to the future, and people will totally accept it. So yeah, those are things I touched on.
Dennis Wheatley, he'll just write about anything that comes to mind, and for some unknown reason, it's almost as if, genre be damned, I'll write it.
Yeah, it's, and I think that's kind of fun. I think that's interesting to see that there is. I read a very strange spy novel of his, which starts off in Argentina with some MI6 fella going to spy on the Argentinians for some reason, which I've forgotten, but then ends up being kidnapped by aliens and taken to Mars.
Yeah.
And Mars is full of small flies who are the bosses, and very tall men who are not the bosses. And I think whilst I was reading that, I just was both impressed and amused at the same time that he had been given the license to do this, and nobody had said maybe stick to one or the other and don't make them flies. But that's fine. I think that's great. I find it fascinating there are things. And the Avengers, I haven't talked about the Avengers, because the proper Avengers with Steed and particularly Honor Blackman as Kathy Gale, I think that was a big influence in the back of my head, because I remember watching those Kathy Gale episodes on TV in the early 90s, and that was something again that just sort of caught me. And I love the fact that you have a TV program that is, over the course of its life, goes from being a very hard-boiled spy show to being something completely far out and weird, but also writes women so incredibly interestingly,
well.
and is happy to give them roles that are not subordinate. And at a time when you look at the equivalent shows that other companies were making, and you don't get roles written as excitingly as like Kathy Gale has written or Emma Peel has written. I think those are so there's a reason that people refer to them as iconic, and it's because they really are. There's something that blaze a trail rather than follow. So yeah, I those are the kind of things that I really love.
I kind of like the way that the Avengers, in its various different male, female, because you've always got Steed, and then until you get to the new Avengers, and then you've got two guys and Purdy. But they flip the roles in a sense for the most part, because Steed is the one who is more of the methodical and looking into the almost paperwork and the nitty gritty of it, whereas the lady in the group is actually the one who goes out there, does the literal kicking of, and so it's almost like a gender swap in a way.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is, and I think that's one of the most exciting things about it, because I was with those, particularly Honor Blackman and Diana Rigg. They're playing characters who are they don't take the flirtatiousness of Steed particularly well. Particularly Honor Blackman's character is always very antagonistic towards Steed in that sense. And they are professionals, and they do their job, and they do their job well. They won't take nonsense from people. They will beat you up, but they're also clever, and they're intelligent. They're written as professional women, and I think that's really exciting, especially when you see like a program like, I don't know, from similar period, like say Ghost Squad or something like that, where women are there, but they're secretaries, or they're the girlfriend, or they're there to make the coffee, and they're not there to do the job. And I think it's really exciting to see at a time when that wasn't really the case in either media or society, to see a show that really tries to break boundaries and change what you can do with a female character on television.
Well, the next item on the bullet points, I don't think we need to do, because you've already, if people have listened carefully, they've got so much advice that they could get just from how we've been speaking, how you've been talking about how you developed the show.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you are, if people are going into thinking about making a fiction podcast, I was thinking about this on and off today. What would I tell people to do? It's like, I think the beauty of podcasting and fiction podcasting as a medium is it's a medium you can learn in on the job, and because you're not got a commissioner, you've not got somebody telling you what works and what doesn't work. You kind of have to sort of learn to do it yourself, and I've always tried to treat it as something where I'll teach myself something new each time, or try to learn how to do something each time. And also, just you're putting yourself out there, that's exposing as well. So it's just a question of like, grabbing hold of it and just going for it really a bit, and seeing what comes out of it, and not being afraid of it taking time. Sometimes this project's lived in my head since the start of 2023, and it took a while to build it. And I was day jobbing as well at the same time, so finding time in my day to that I could write, or finding some time in the evening when the kids were in bed, where I'd sit down and start typing or listening to something that would inspire me. It's just chipping away at it a bit, especially at this level, because you're doing it around something else, and it, not being afraid to kind of just work at that speed. Having said that, having a deadline is quite useful as well, because there is a point where you just have to go, let's get it out there and hope for the best and see if people like it.
Absolutely. So, what shows do you like to listen to yourself, podcast-wise, and audio dramas if you listen to them?
I do listen to audio drama. I don't listen to as many as perhaps I should, just for a matter of time. I've been listening to Audioma's Lonely No More recently, which is written by Sebastian Bonszkiewicz, who's, I really love his writing. I think his series Pilgrim for Radio 4 is incredible, and I always liked. He did years ago a King Arthur series, which I thought was incredible, and so that's I think it's an 8-part podcast series, which I think you can find on iTunes, on wherever you find podcasts these days. I really enjoyed that. That's excellent. I listened to the Holmwood Foundation recently, because I'd seen that come up a lot, and I knew people who tangentially who worked on that, and I thought that was very enjoyable. And a show, I think the Limelight strand on Radio 4 is really exciting, because I think it's doing things that a lot of other radio drama doesn't necessarily do. And they did a series recently called Mother Cover, which was, the premise of it sounded quite comedic, because it's young mums on maternity leave being recruited by MI5. But when you listen to it, it's so, they do it straight, and it really grabs you. And I got hooked on that very, very quickly. So those are kind of the fiction ones I've listened to most recently. But I do have when I have the time, I have a quite a voracious appetite for audio drama. I think it's a really good medium.
The Limelight series of dramas. So what they will do on the BBC, and I'm a huge fan of it as well, is they will have a series of like 5 or 6 episode series, sometimes longer, which is a specific story told from beginning to end. And then Limelight is sort of like, and then they have a different story. So they're all different stories told over a certain amount of parts. And I was introduced to it through the Central Intelligence series, if you know that one, starring Kim Cattrall and Ed Harris. I found that fascinating with its whereas that one is based in part on truth and on real characters, but it's got some fictionalized elements, I think, in there. But yeah, it's nice to see the BBC still making shows like that.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because it costs a lot. Audio drama costs a lot of money, even on a small way. And I think when budgets are tight and purse strings are being cut, it's not. It's always, sadly, sometimes audio drama kind of gets pushed a bit to the wayside, I think. And that's not just BBC, we're talking in general. I think it certainly sometimes feels like, when we were first making audio dramas ourselves a few years ago, there felt like a real energy a bit. Maybe that was just because we were younger, but it does feel a bit like now the trajectory of podcasting is mainly within those kind of talk shows which you can make fairly cheaply and pump out quite regularly, whereas with an audio drama, obviously you've got a writer, you've got a cast, you've got to contract, you've got to do all those kind of things that you do. There's rates that you pay, and so it makes it very, very, it can make it a little bit prohibitive. But I think, as we are so lucky in this country, that we still do have, even in reduced circumstances, we do have outlets for audio drama like Radio 4, people like Big Finish, and the indie sector, which is such a vast thing now, is exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how can people get hold of you and find the shows that are made by Definitely Human?
You can find Definitely Human as a organization don't really do social media anymore to any great extent. There is an Instagram account that they have, because I tend to just flit in and out of their orbit like a sort of suave moon. And so they have an Instagram account which is at Definitely Human Productions. The Divide itself has an Instagram account which is The Divide Drama, and I'm kind of trying to work out what I'm supposed to do with that now that the show has ended. That's always the problem with this kind of stuff, is what you do with it next. Again, also on Blue Sky, which is a thing now, we are at The Divide Drama on Blue Sky, and I am also on there as well, as I think I'm M.R. Woodcock on Blue Sky. Should somebody have some insane desire to see what I say. I don't really do it a lot because I feel like a lot of the fun and the joy of social media has kind of leached out. But every now and again, I will dip my head above the parapet and say something vaguely amusing or not vaguely amusing, or just post a picture of some books and then disappear again. It's so those are where I can mainly be found, and where the show can mainly be found. And obviously, Definitely Humans shows are all available on your local branch of podcasts. They're wherever you find them, that's where they are. There's at least 7 or 8 of them now, and hopefully they'll do more in the future, and they will prosper. But as I say, these things take time. So do check them out. The Divide, which was our last show, that's very jolly if you like submarines and things like that. And all my old shows are on there as well.
That's good. And who knows, we might get a return for Paul Wilder at some point.
I mean, that would be nice. I'm not saying anything, but that would be very nice. And I'm definitely not phoning up David Knight all the time and saying, why don't we do another one at all.
Put Mark through all that emotional turmoil all over again.
Oh God bless him. Especially all that narration which he did in his own booth, in his own house, on his own. Bless him.
All those little bits where he's doing the dialogue, and then he so perfectly catches Paul's realization. So he was delivering. This is something that I loved. So he's delivering in certain bits he's delivering the narration or he's talking in character to somebody else, and then there's a slight change in his voice where it's almost like he realizes what's happening, and it comes to him. And there's a few moments like that are just really good acting.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he is brilliant. He is so. I could wax lyrical about Mark until the cows come home because he is fabulous, and he just he just got it. He was just so perfect. Like the minute I heard him say the lines the first time we did the read through, it was electric. It was just like it moved my cold, icy heart to hear someone treat my nonsense with some form of respect, like it was legitimate, and that was quite nice. It was just seeing him take that and understand it and really run with it. And I will be forever grateful to everybody who took a role in The Divide or worked on it in some form, because it has been, I think, for everybody who's been involved, everybody feels, I think, like it's been something of a labor of love, and I think that comes across in the final piece.
Absolutely. You can find Pods Like Us on any streaming platform. We are also on Patreon, and the easiest way to find us really is just to go to the marvzone.org, where all the links are just there on the opening page. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.